But absolutely lovely to be here. Hi, everybody. I'm Bradley. I'm the head of sales here at Applied. I can assure you that this will not be a sales pitch, but rather is actually a way of us sharing all of the great work that our product team have been doing in the last 6 months in developing some really exciting bits and bobs of functionality. We're going to try and keep this session as interactive as possible. I know Kayla, who's our VP of Marketing, is in the chat. Please post questions as we run through today. We're going to try and keep it sort of as interactive and engaging as possible. I'm just going to wait for the rest of the attendees to join. But whilst I do, let me quickly share my screen here. Can you all see my screen? Can you all see that? Brilliant. Thank you. And if we just go through who, so I know who's joining the session today whilst we wait for some people to join. Do we have any existing Applied customers with us? If so, say hello and the organizations that you're at. If we have some non-customers, please do also say hello and the organizations that you're at. I think I recognize a few names, maybe some that we've spoken to before, others that we're working with, but do all introduce yourselves to one another. Kerry from the Department for Leveling Up, Harriet, how's it going? Sharon from ChildNet, NATO from the Brilliant Club, Yvonne from Finance Innovation Lab. Really exciting. Hey Manu, lovely to see you. I say see you, I can't really see you, but lovely to see your name. Looks like lots of customers as well as a couple of non-customers. So what are we actually going to be focusing on today? It's sort of 4 key themes. So the first theme is, and apologies to those of you who are using Applied, a very quick summary and recap of why we exist and what we do. After that, we're then going to turn to 2 new product features. So the first product feature is anonymous CV scoring. Think of it as an automated blind review tool. And the reason we've introduced this is we recognize that a fair few organizations that we're using Applied, whilst they have commitments to inclusive recruitment, we're still manually blinding and using resumes later on in the process anyhow. So what we've introduced is a tool that makes that very process easier and more rigorous when it comes to reviewing resumes. The second product feature that we're going to be looking at is how to actively source candidates. And our revamped sourcing page. So Richard, who I believe is in the session today from our product team, is going to be on hand as well to answer any questions. But we know that in Applied, some of you who are customers of ours might have noticed this. Whilst Applied works really well alongside recruitment agencies, and you can give them a UTM code, for instance, that lets you track the pool of candidates they're sending you, there's not actually a single place, or up to now, there's not been a single place in which you can manage seeing all of your candidates that you're sourcing. So that's what that active sourcing element's for. And then we will have some time at the end for Q&A. It doesn't have to, strictly speaking, be on these 2 bits of functionality we've been working on. It can be on anything. And we also have Kayla on hand as well to answer questions in the chat. So why Applied? Who are Applied? For those of you that might not have heard of us, for those of you that had, quick recap on why we exist. In essence, we are an applicant tracking system designed for inclusive hiring. What's an applicant tracking system? Put simply, a tool that you can effectively manage your entire hiring process through. Now, our applicant tracking system is a little bit different to most in the sense that it aims to improve the hiring outcomes that you're moving towards and ensure that you're no longer doing things like hiring the wrong candidate because you thought they might have been a great fit on paper, but in reality they weren't. It's also designed to mitigate bias. So having things like anonymous shortlisting throughout, which we know mitigates implicit bias, and structuring interviews and using crowd wisdom ensures that organizations that are using the system no longer run prone or fall as risk to building homogenous teams, groups of people that all look and sound and speak and think the same, which is bad for productivity and bad for lots of charities that we work with who are serving a community and don't actually reflect it in their head office. And then there's other things that we do that you would expect from any system that you manage your hiring through. So recovering wasted hours, no more time spent on manual admin. I hope that the CV tool that we run through and the ease in which you can allocate for those resumes to be reviewed is a prime example of how HR managers no longer need to invest as much time in manual work, as well as things like curbing a candidate experience that might be poor. So giving candidates a really clear path to apply and understand what's happening in the process and getting feedback, etc., as well as understanding how you're doing overall, not just in terms of diversity and building great teams, but also in terms of how's your sourcing going, how's your shortlisting going, that sort of thing. So coming back to sort of our bare bones of why we exist, some of you who've spoken to me or spoken to the team here at Applied, you might be familiar with this correspondence study. It's one of the sort of core principles we were founded on, which is hiring is grossly unfair, at least in its traditional makeup. So what you're looking at here is an example of a correspondence study done in Germany, where if the same candidate's application is sent out thousands of times, but all we do is change one or two factors, like a name or a photograph, that relate to somebody's background, how does that influence their ability to get hired? So what you're looking at here is if Sandra Bauer in Germany sends 1,000 resumes out, she gets just under a 1 in 5 callback rate to interview. Now, if we change her name to Miriam, that callback rate falls by 5%. In Germany, you have a photograph on your resume, but in pretty much all roles that you're hiring in, you can access someone's LinkedIn profile, and lots of hiring managers do. If Miriam Ozturk is wearing a headscarf, that callback rate falls to 4%. So there's good reason to want to anonymize applications and at the very least introduce blinding, not least because this Miriam Ozturk here with the headscarf is the same candidate as Sandra Bauer and very well may have all of the skills that you're looking for in the roles that you're hiring in, but you are overlooking due to the role of bias. Now, we're not here to say that the CV is the most effective way to hire. It's not. There are much better predictors of performance. Work sample assessments are what we recommend as a more predictive indication of performance, at least for shortlisting, and structured interviews once you have shortlisted and you're getting into the meat and bones of your hiring process. That being said, where you do have to use a CV, be it because you have certain compliance checks or you have hiring managers that aren't fully on board with using this, we want to make sure that your CV assessment, whilst it may not be quite as predictive, is at the very least as debiased as it ought to be, which is what we're going to look at today. So just a reminder that this is by no means just everything that we do, but really we're going to be focusing on these sort of two elements of sourcing, assessment, and shortlisting today, starting with the debias CV tool, which guardrails against bias by ensuring you have a structured scoring guide and distributes reviews so that you have crowd wisdom and automatically anonymizes so as to mitigate bias. The active sourcing is all about ensuring your shortlisting is streamlined. So I'm just going to move to actually going into the products now and share my screen with you all here. One second. Can you see my screen here? Can you see that? If someone wants to let me know in the chat, brilliant. Sorry, I got a little bit of lag. So let's start with using our CV tool. For those of you who are Succession fans, we're going to be hiring at Waystar Royco. Apologies for those of you that haven't, but please indulge me this moment to actually engage with my favorite show at the moment in Applied. So at application stage, you always have choice over what kind of assessment you want to use. Now, as standard, we'll turn on SIF questions, which relate to those work samples that are significantly more predictive than using CVs. And if you turn on the structured CV review, it will automatically now be anonymized. You can turn anonymization off, but we see no benefit to really doing that. Now, what you'll notice is pulling together all of the research that we did around what organizations typically look for in a resume. We have 3 standard focus questions that you can use. Do this candidate's responsibilities indicate that they have the minimum skill set? Do their accomplishments indicate they'll perform well? And have they shown that they can contribute to a team or goals in a meaningful way? Now, you can edit any of these, as is the same with work samples, and change the question, as well as the review guide, which is always going to be scored from yes to some to none, or no, in terms of answers. As you'll notice, all of the skills that you've defined up front for the role that you're looking at in shortlisting and interview, they appear here as a prompt on the CV review. Why is this important? What we really, no spoilers, Richard. We really want to be getting away from sort of having that yes, no, maybe pile for being vaguely good. And what we want to move towards is having a more rigorous process in which the resume is scored. So this is Waystar Royco's operations manager role. There have been 10 candidates that have submitted applications, and I'm going to show you very quickly how you can invite those candidates to be reviewed. Instead of, I'm assuming right now, lots of your processes might look like downloading each application individually, blinding each CV, saving them in a drive, and then emailing them to hiring managers. So through Applied, much like allocating work samples, you select all of the applicants that are eligible, and you can filter that eligibility based on admin questions that have been answered by candidates up front. What you then do is click this button here, send to anonymous review. Now, you'd probably send the work sample questions to anonymous review first, but you can send to CV review at any part of the hiring process as well. As you can see, anonymization is turned on, and we've got the 3 focus questions here that we've decided we're going to be reviewing the resumes against. Now, you can set these, as mentioned, to whatever you'd like. We'd recommend having 3 reviewers. For the purposes of the demo, I have 2, Amy and Jesse, but you can add those reviewers straight from here without any manual work. If you'd like to add a note for the reviewers to give them guidance over what they should be looking for or a deadline, you can do that too. So when you send those review invites, Alex Album from Waystar Royco can access those reviews from their individual task section. And you can see here, they've got some CV reviews to do that they've not started. You can also see that they've got some SIF question reviews they've not started. Now, some contributors, i.e. those who are invited to do reviews or to do interviews, they'll use their dashboard. Others will simply use their email. So you can access the reviews from any place, making it really easy for hiring managers to engage with this process in a way that suits them. So you can see here, I'm playing as Kendall. So hi, Kendall. Bradley's invited you to review CVs or resumes from the operations manager candidates. Dive straight in. So Kendall gets a quick introductory message. And Kendall, for the purposes of today, is going to be reviewing 3 resumes. We can view the job description. We can see some frequently asked questions, maybe some questions that you have, like, do I need to review all of them in one session? You don't. We'd recommend taking a break after 40 minutes or so. How are CVs being assessed? Let's click on this one here. Oh. How will I assess CVs? This is a clickable prototype and doesn't want to open. Your team has set up focus questions that will help you assess everyone's CVs using the same criteria. You can answer questions with yes, no, or some. We'll then transform everyone's answers into an average 1 to 5 score. So you're aware of how we're scoring. Yes is 5, some is 3, no is 1. Final question, how will I see the scores? You'll see a summary at the end, and the job administrator, and I'll show you that side of things, can use those scores to guide decision making. So we've got the 3 focus questions that we've defined. And what we then see here automatically is an automatically anonymized resume that we score against these focus questions. So that data has been automatically redacted and will happen for all of the resumes you put through the system or candidates apply with. So let's say this candidate has some responsibilities that would indicate they could do the operations manager role. They can contribute to a team, and they have some experience outside of work that relate to performance. Another candidate's resume comes through, again, same process, no names. And it's worth saying that other people in the process will be doing this, so you're not relying on one person's judgment. Final candidate, let's review their resume. They've got all the experience we might be looking for. So you can see here that under resumes, under the CV screen, there's an average score of 4.3 that I've given, and I'll be able to see how other people from my team have scored the resume too. And we can see here that these are the candidates' anonymous scores. So if we go back to our hiring dashboard, this is where you can start to see how this could be used alongside work sample questions. So we've got 3 candidates here whose resumes we've scored for Waystar Royco. We're probably going to invite all of them to interview, looking at their scores. But you can see here that this candidate that scored 3.7 out of 5 on the resume, they had the lowest performing resume. They did best on the questions that truly reflected the job. They might have done best on drafting an email, dealing with a difficult dispute with 2 employees. They might have done better explaining how they would go about, I don't know, setting up a new HRIS system, which might be a key project for Waystar Royco. Or they might have done really well explaining how they would distribute, board meeting notes after a meeting they sat on. But they didn't do as well in where we thought they might be good at the job based off the resume. And if we reveal the candidate details under the management page, we can see that this was Meryem Ozturk. So Meryem Ozturk, best in the work samples, not as good in the CV screen. And then you have Samuel Lee and Clara Jenkins, who Samuel Lee had a perfect resume and did okay on the work samples. Clara did really well on the CV screen, but not quite as good on the CIF questions. What we're all about doing is giving you as much information as possible to objectively make a better hiring decision. And then through Applied, you can, of course, manage your process. So you can select all of those applicants, and you might want to invite them through to interview or mark them as unsuccessful, or have another person review the CIF questions or CVs. You have flexibility to manage that process as you wish. So that's the anonymous CV review. We're really excited about it. We've had a really positive response initially, but do have a conversation with Sarah, who I'll put the details up at the end if you are an existing customer of ours. If you're interested in learning more about this, do reach out to me. Let's now focus on sourcing, active sourcing. You might, if you are a customer of ours, have noticed that our sourcing page has had a little facelift. It's easier to use than ever. All of the different sections that you might source via are clearer, and we've really focused on building out the functionality of our talent pool. One of the things you may have noticed if you use the system is you're only ever able to see candidates that have shown interest by way of sourcing. What does that mean? You can't see a candidate in your pipeline up until now that hasn't at least started an application. And we want to change that because we want to make it easier for you to reach out to top performing candidates or candidates you're trying to headhunt and have them in one place. So let's imagine that we've reached out to the brilliant Richard, who has designed this, and I'm just going to put his email in here. He wouldn't use his work email to apply to a job at Waystar, but we'll go with it. And we can say that we've sourced him through LinkedIn. There are certain obligations under GDPR for storing this candidate data that we've covered and ticked off. And when we add Richard, he then appears as one new prospective candidate. Now, what we can then do is ensure that we're managing all of our leads, all of the prospective candidates we're reaching out to in a single place. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the details of filling in 4 or 5 other candidates, but you can add leads. And here you can see we've now got Anna, Mohammed, Sarah, Mariana Zalotti, and Richard all in one place. They're 5 new candidates. Now, what are we going to do with this? Well, we can invite them to apply to the job. So for the investment associate role, following a conversation we've got with them, and we can edit this as we see fit, we can say here, great to speak earlier, thanks for your time. We'd love for you to apply to this role at this organisation, at Waystar Royco. And we can, if we'd like, make the job application a quick apply. What is quick apply? Just so that everybody's on board with, sort of the functionality of applied and how we offer some variance in process. We would recommend that the vast majority of candidates you have applying to jobs all go through the same process, completing work samples, submitting resumes, doing structured interviews. For some roles, you may have a list of candidates that you've interviewed prior, or you may have a list of candidates that you want to guarantee interviews with. Quick apply means that they can bypass that part of the assessment process, at least the initial shortlist. They just submit their details and then they're through to the next round, for instance. It keeps friction minimal for candidates. So we can invite these candidates to apply. I've not quick applied these ones, and they're able to apply for the investment associate role at Waystar Royco. So I'm going to input my email address. I'm actually going to apply as if I'm Mrs. Zalotti. And I'm going to start my application. Now, I'm not going to take you through the whole process. Let's imagine that Mariana has completed their application. They've answered the work samples. And as you can see here, if they went back to the page, they've submitted their application for the role. What you'll be able to see is Mariana is now one out of the 5 total candidates that has submitted their application. And if we come to the investment associate role, we can see that Mariana Zalotti is here as the single submitted candidate. What we can't see are the other 4 candidates that we've been reaching out to because they exist in the sourcing section under invited. So what we may choose to do, because we want to stay on top of having all of these candidates in one place, is select all of these applicants and send them a chaser email. Hi, hope you're doing well. Here's a reminder that the link to apply for this role is here. Would love to hear from you. It's a way to really effectively stay on top of your talent pool. So that, in essence, is one of the new bits of work that we've done around sourcing. I think now might be a good time to take questions and use this as an opportunity to sort of, answer any questions that you have. Before we do, there were sort of 2 things I wanted to emphasize. If you are not a customer and you're interested in learning more for your organization, do reach out to me directly. My email is bradley@beapplied.com, or you can simply QR scan this and you'll end up on my LinkedIn. If you are a customer and you want to make sure that your team are getting the most out of sourcing, the CV tool, or any functionality, Sarah Hicks is your go-to for this, and her email is sarah@beapplied.com. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen very quickly there, and I'm going to go to the chat. Kayla, I can see there's lots of conversation happening here. Wow. How do we want to handle the questions? Should I run through them?
So yeah, there's a bit of chat around receiving essentially a high volume of applications, struggling to keep up. I think some of our customers have kind of answered that and chatted about it in the chat, but yeah, great to have a view on that one.
So Ian's asked, how could the CV scoring criteria work for people who have less experience, e.g. 0 to 2 years, as often little depth or substance to draw upon? I think, Ian, that is to a certain extent exactly why we would recommend not using the resume with early careers. You know, we've done quite a lot of work with Ogilvy, for instance, as well as Penguin, who run their internship and apprenticeship programs through Applied. The use of work samples means that, you know, where there's a lack of experience, you can understand someone's skill set. I guess the only thing that you could look towards is, you know, extracurricular activities or how well somebody structures it. But again, they're often proxies of how middle class or privileged you've been and how many opportunities you've been handed, rather than necessarily what you've done yourself. So I think really you might choose to just use the CV rather than something you score based off as like for compliance and validating somebody has been at the school that they said they had, for instance. Charlotte, we're receiving 100+ applications for our roles at the moment. We're struggling to keep up with 3 people reviewing every SIF question. How would you recommend we use CV reviews to lessen the workload? Really good question. So I think, Charlotte, to your question here, there are ways you can manage volumes of reviewing work samples, first and foremost. You don't have to have 3 people reviewing every SIF question first. What we might advise you do is choose the 2, for instance, most important SIF questions, and maybe have 2 people reviewing them. And then candidates that clearly score below, I don't know, 2.5 out of 5, you can qualify them out, mark them as unsuccessful, and then introduce another reviewer and review the other questions. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is we would never advise making a decision on how to shortlist based off the CV alone. But what you can do is have 1 or 2 other people review the resumes of those pre-sifted candidates that have scored higher. So I think that's what we would advise overall. Kim, are there any other examples of good CV review questions? That's a question I would probably put to our customer success team who are working on this day in, day out. If you want to drop Sarah a message, I'm sure there are lots of them, but really it's about defining whatever good looks like for the role you're hiring in your organization. Richard, you've answered some questions.
Bradley, I think there's another one here from Ian. Can we create multiple templates for communicating with candidates, for example, inviting to apply versus sending a reminder, etc.?
Yes, absolutely. Do you know what? It might actually be useful for me to show that in the product now. Ian, if this has been a feature that's been live for a fair while now, and you can actually use on a role by role level. So if I share my screen with you here, can you all see this? Can you see that? Just let me know in the chat. Brilliant. So Ian, for this operations manager role that we're hiring in, under candidate comms, for this role, what you'll notice is you can use your company default template for when a candidate starts an application, when a candidate submits an application, and then there are different templates that you can utilize when rejecting candidates or inviting them to interview or inviting them to an assessment round, as well as other general communications. So you should be able to edit any of these in your template settings. So right now, if I apply to a job at this organization and I've submitted, I've started as a candidate, I'll receive a link from the admin that looks like this. It says, hi, here's your link to the application. If you have any questions, you can respond directly. Here's what applied is. If you wanted to edit any of these, I'm just going to share this tab. Under your settings section, you can go to email templates and you can add new templates or edit your existing ones for any specific use case in your process. And it's really easy to do this. The other thing you can do is add templates that fall under other that you can just pull into different parts of your process so as to not have to manually write an email every single time. Hope that's helpful. I'm just trying to get through all the rest of the questions.
Another question from Helen. When inviting candidates to apply for roles, is it possible for us to direct candidates to our ads on CS Jobs before allowing them to apply through Applied? Oh, okay, so that they can view the full ad and any attachments that
that's really interesting. So when you do invite a candidate to apply for a role, presumably they would click on the link that takes them to the specific role microsite. If in that job description you want to have a link to CS Jobs to learn more, you can. In addition, you can also edit the email that you send. So if you wanted in that email to have the link to CS Jobs' full advert, you could also send that there. So I think 2 suggestions. 1, put it in your job description so everyone goes back to CS Jobs if you want them to see it. 2, put it in the email you're sending when actively sourcing candidates. Teresa, in terms of reviewing CVs, would you recommend only doing that for, say, the top 10 scoring candidates for the work samples? I wouldn't say that there's a hard and fast like single number that we would recommend, Teresa. But what I think we would say is your work samples should still be defining the bulk meat and potatoes of who you ought to shortlist based off skill, and the CVs are there to sort of ensure that you, if you're requiring CVs, you're being more rigorous with how you review them. Do we have any other questions? If anyone has any other questions, here we go. Christopher, what makes us stand out or different from other ATS systems used across the tech industry, such as Greenhouse or Lever? Yeah, it's a really good question. I'd be interested to know if you do want to post in the chat what applicant tracking system you're using right now. I think it's all of what we've been talking about just now. So you're using Greenhouse. Like, the thing that makes us different to Greenhouse is brilliant if your main priority is speed of current process and integrations. Say you're a 500-person startup and you want your ATS to seamlessly link to absolutely every other system that you could imagine. Greenhouse is great for that. What Greenhouse won't do is truly improve the diversity of your organization, nor will it ensure that you have as much objectivity with making better hiring decisions and therefore a lower likelihood of hiring the sort of person you wouldn't traditionally hire. And that's clear in the way in which you interview through Applied. So our interviews are structured, and we really place a focus on having marking rubrics. When you shortlist through Applied using work samples, that's an entirely different form of assessment that's anonymously scored. And when you review resumes, we've really focused on, if you are going to utilize what we see as a more biased form of assessment, being as debiased as possible. And then you have the EDI focus around data, Christopher. So like, one of the big bits of feedback we've heard from Greenhouse is it's great in terms of being able to like customize the candidate form, but you don't necessarily know where you stand in terms of the diversity of your talent pool. I'd say 94% of candidates fill in equal ops info, and you can then actually understand where you're at any scale in your organization from that perspective. So I think it's about sort of the focus on ED&I from our standpoint, as well as changing the hiring process that you're using, is what makes us stand out from tools like Greenhouse, Lever, Workable, etc. Hope that's helpful. Charlotte, slightly different to the aspects covered in this webinar, but we're seeing a lot of word-for-word answers in our SIFs, which we think is the result of people using AI. We're working on making our SIFs harder to run through AI, but I wondered if you plan to introduce any type of similarity checker to help with this sort of issue. Absolutely. So if you don't know what ChatGPT is, you have been living under a rock for the last couple of months. I think ChatGPT and generative AI is going to change the way that all organizations have to hire, and every single organization is going to be impacted by it, and in some way, not just in terms of recruitment, but how we work. We have seen some organizations that are struggling with, candidates that are utilizing ChatGPT to answer work samples. There are a few things that we've done immediately to respond to this. So the first thing is when candidates verify they're answering as themselves, they have to explicitly verify that they are not using ChatGPT at the current point in time. In addition, we do have plans to introduce a plagiarism tracker, which should detect use of ChatGPT, which is sort of something that our product team, Richard, are actively looking at now. And then I think the final thing that I would say, Charlotte, is whilst we have seen an ever so slight increase in the quality of like average answers, so you might have seen a slight bump in the average performing candidate moving from sort of 2 to 3 out of 5 stars, we've not seen ChatGPT used amongst the top performing answers. It's quite clear that ChatGPT right now and generative AI can mimic an okay answer, whereas otherwise it might have traditionally have been a pretty poor one. But what we've seen at the very least is those who can do the role and are answering the questions well are still coming out on top. Whilst we are developing a plagiarism checker, my advice would be, if this is a concern for you, report it to your customer success manager who can advise. And also perhaps run your work samples through ChatGPT first, look at what that answer is, and then be sure to have that up when reviewing. This challenge isn't going to go away. And if you were using covering letters, it might be even harder to decipher. But yeah, really appreciate you bringing it up. It is an active focus for us and something that we are working hard on. Vanessa, if I put an ad out for 3 weeks, an interested lead clicks the link to apply outside of that window, will they receive an email notification to advise this advert has closed? Apologies if I missed this. I believe so. I believe that if a candidate wants to apply for a role and it has since closed, then it will say that the role is closed on the application page. Thanks, Charlotte. Hope that's useful. If you reach out to our CS team directly, we actually have a public-facing document on ChatGPT around our full strategy that I sort of touched on there. Does anyone else have any other questions? I wonder if there's been any progress to be able to give applications a 0 rating, as we highlighted, as it was misleading to give a 1-score answer if that answer is completely incorrect. Jane, if you want to pop myself or Richard an email, my email is here. I can pass this on to our product team. Whilst we've got a few people that are still here, I had a very quick ask. If you are an organization that is using Applied and really enjoying it and loving it, we would absolutely love it if you could talk about us on G2. G2 is sort of a centralized review page, typically used by tech companies, but lots of organizations that might be looking at what applicant tracking systems to use. We had somebody mention Greenhouse as an ATS. We would absolutely love it if you could leave a review here on g2.com/products/applied/reviews. And we'll make sure to put that in the follow-up email to this session. So that's G2 reviews. If anybody has really enjoyed using Applied, massively appreciate using it. The link is on screen, and I'm going to post the link in the chat. Does anyone else have any other questions? Oh, you've put it through. Review applied. Thanks for that, Kayla. Is the anonymous CV feature an add-on to existing services or something additional that teams would have to add? Celine, absolutely not. We do not want to limit the organizations using Applied from doing things right and being debiased. It's included as standard. I guess to a point that was raised earlier, how we're different to other solutions. We don't have that many add-on premium features. The only instance that we introduced add-ons that you would ever pay for is if there was engineering work required from our team side or additional support work required from our side. The anonymous CV feature is standard and something that you can all use today if you're using the system. Thanks for the question, Celine. Jenny, are we able to change the CV review questions at any point up until we review? I believe so, yes. I believe that as soon as you've started reviewing one application, you can't go back and change the CV review questions, because then you're not comparing CVs like for like. However, up until that point, I believe that much like with the marking rubric of work samples, you are able to edit that. Richard, feel free to tell me if I'm mistaken on that point, but I believe you can change the CV review questions. Thanks for that, Jenny. Does anyone else have any other questions? Feel free to pop them in the chat. Brilliant. I'm going to take that as a no. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. Thanks for running through that. If you can, and you're loving using Applied, leave that G2 review, would be most appreciated. But thank you for your time, and hoping to see you at another webinar like this soon. Really appreciate everyone joining. Take care. Bye-bye.